Employees often dread meetings, and for good reason. While some meetings can be productive and stimulating, many, perhaps most, are a waste of time. It is estimated that between 25 and 50% of the time people spend in meetings is wasted. Then there are all of the expenses that come with face-to-face meetings too, the cost of travel, transportation, food and accommodation. Over the last couple of decades, audio and video conferencing have grown in popularity. It is clear to see why. The technology allows organizations to save on many of those costs. There's also strong evidence that these solutions improve collaboration and productivity. But it's not just about the technology. After all, it's just a tool, even if it is a very useful one. It's also about understanding the dynamics of meetings, the different personality types and their agendas, which may be very different from those on the handout. Here to discuss this with me today is Judith Hogan, Head of Sales from Plantronics, Clive Longbottom from Quocirca, and Dan Worth, Deputy Editor of V3, who will be presenting our research. So before we kick off, Judith, maybe you can tell us what you think in terms of how meetings have progressed in the last 10 years. Do you think they've improved at all through technology?
I'm not sure, really. I think because of sort of recession and austerity, meetings changed. We moved to perhaps using technology and moving to conference calls because of travel bans. But I'm not sure we put the right sort of focus, the right technology and right rules in place. So I think we've sort of derailed a little bit in terms of how things are going. At Plantronics, we try to focus on smarter meetings, which are meetings with clear objectives that don't overrun, that have the right technology and the right spaces, whether virtual or physical.
Okay, great. Well, before we get into a deeper discussion, I'd like to put out the first poll question, and that's for you, our audience. So you'll see a poll question popping up on your screen now, and we're asking, on a scale of 1 to 5, how useful are most meetings that you attend, face-to-face or via audio or video conferencing? Is it 1, very useful, 2, fairly useful, 3, a mixed bag, 4, not useful, or 5, a waste of time? So if you'd like to answer that question, when we'll look at the answers later on in the broadcast. So let's get into this a bit more, Clive. And what is your opinion in terms of how to get the best out of a meeting? How do you make it effective?
Well, as has been said, the technology itself is just a tool. So, the meeting has got to have a purpose. It's not a case of, oh, look, it's Wednesday, we must have the weekly meeting. And we need to kill those sort of meetings off as much as we possibly can. A meeting has to have an end result. Now, people have got to understand that there is a lot of difference between a desired end result and what the end result really should be. So it's not a case of having a meeting to come to a pre-arranged decision. It's a case of we need to have that meeting to challenge the position, to be able to make sure that the decision that is being made is correct. So for that, you need a lot of preparation. You need to make sure you've got the right people in the meeting. You've got to make sure that they've had the information that they need beforehand and that they, as much as possible, have read it and bring along extra information to build on that. You need a very strong chair who can make sure that people are being involved at the right times, that those who are wanting to take the meeting down the rabbit holes are brought back onto the subject as needs be. You need somebody who's there who is taking notes, not the sort of standard notes that come out afterwards, he said this, she said that, but what was decided, what was the value of that meeting, and that value can then be communicated to other stakeholders within and at times outside of the organisation to make sure that the meeting was valuable. So it's getting those skills in place, making sure that the meeting is run for a proper purpose.
Okay, great. Judith, I don't know if you had anything to add to that.
I think I agree with Clive, to be fit for purpose. I think the problem is that lots of companies have set meetings at set times to review things, and sometimes they don't actually have anything to talk about. So there seems to be some pressure that we have to have a monthly review or a weekly review or a quarterly review just because it's in the diary. And then nobody's looking forward to it. People don't want to attend. It just doesn't really come together. So then there starts to be a perception that people are wasting their time, and I think the key thing there is that people aren't engaged. And if people aren't engaged, then they're not going to get any quality output. there's going to be a lot of negativity in the organisation. The other thing is, are we training people for this changing face of technology and meetings? You know, we've gone from a lot of face-to-face meetings to more conference calls. Have people been trained properly? Have they got the right tools to actually manage a good quality meeting?
And Clive, who do you think, you know, whose duty is it to train the staff in terms of using this technology?
Well, one of the really sad things that we've seen is this sort of ownership is power rather than knowledge is power. So you get the massive, great, multi-100,000-pound video suites that are put in place, and it's a case of, no, you're too junior to use that, it's only for the execs. And so it only gets used once a month. If it's lucky, you know, you go into the room and it's got dust all over the place. And the same has tended to happen with straightforward audio conferencing and web conferencing within organisations. Because the junior people don't know that it's available to them, they can't use it. And so where they should be doing better collaboration and communication with each other, they're not using it at all. They have to wait until somebody further up the hierarchy has said to them, oh right, yes, let's call together a meeting around this. I'll set it up, or I'll get somebody else to set it up who knows what they're doing. A lot of people have been caught by the old style of doing this, where it was a case of, you know, with video conferencing, you had to get in touch with BT, get them to set up the whole thing in the first place. With audio conferencing, it was an arcane art of, right, so you dial into this number and then you have to either dial other people in, or you have to put in, you know, a 14,000 character number and then be able to press button 1, button 8, button 4. It's far simpler these days, you know, just put in 6 characters once you're through to this audio conferencing space. So yeah, just making sure that people are aware that it's far more simple, making them aware that in some cases it might just be a case of it's bringing 3 people together on an ad hoc basis because you need a decision making now with all the right information around. It doesn't have to be a completely formal meeting. But that sort of education, again, it comes down to the business processes. You need the people within the business to be able to say, yes, we understand this. We can educate the people as to why it's necessary, why they should be using this more, what the value is that they can get out of it. So it's a business issue.
Okay, great. And Judith, in terms of the tools then, how do you decide what tools? So even if you have the training, you need to make sure you've got the right tools in place.
So I think, you know, for a conference call, you need to have acoustically, you need to have the right environment, you need to have the right audio equipment, whether that's somebody working from home. Typically they need to be somewhere where they have the right bandwidth, if they're using soft phone and conferencing tools, desktop sharing. Things can quickly unravel, you know, if somebody's in a train station and you hear lots of background noise, if people aren't on mute, there's a dog barking, you know, if the bandwidth isn't strong enough to support video or even voice, people quickly get disengaged if they can't hear or there's breaking up on the line, and you know, people quickly get annoyed and suddenly the whole meeting is completely off course. Falls apart. You know, nothing can be agreed if people can't even hear each other effectively, or somebody's getting very cross because they can hear all sorts of other background noise that they don't want to.
Yeah, definitely. And speaking of factors that could, you know, affect a meeting, Dan, you've got some research for us.
That's right. So the data should be on the screen now for the audience. And as you can see, we asked people what their biggest sort of bugbear was about meetings and what caused them to have a bad experience with meetings. You see, quite clearly the top issue was something that Clive touched on earlier, which is this lack of focus and people going off on tangents. And I think we all know people like that have been in that situation. And additionally, we see people who don't read materials prior to meetings, so they come into it a bit blind when they shouldn't, or people arrive late, who don't pay attention. And I think that's quite, again, something we all probably know quite well, but it seems like the kind of thing that really is, you are wasting time if you let that take up the time in your meeting. Additionally, we also see that a lot of people found the issue of a weak chair, someone who doesn't sort of ensure the meeting has purpose and sticks to that purpose throughout was a bugbear. And then interestingly at the bottom we see 21% of people say they feel a lot of their meetings they're involved in don't need to be physical meetings at all, and they could be done via email or conferencing technologies. So I think that touches on quite a few of the issues raised there. And then if we look at the sort of types of people who are sort of considered to have be causing these issues, actually on the screen now, we can see that this person called the derailer is sort of seen as the person responsible for these going off on these tangents. And then, it sounds obviously a pain, and again comes into that issue of the chairperson has to make sure they don't let that person take over. And we also see the noisemaker, again, someone who perhaps says a lot, but did they actually say anything worth saying. But then also we do see these people like the multitasker who's keen to get things done, sounds like a good person to have in the meeting, and the agreeable one who sadly seems to be the least well-known person you meet in a meeting, but they are there nonetheless. So I suppose this comes back into these issues as having technology is great, but you also need to make sure you use it to make sure the type of people you're getting into these meetings understand what the purpose of the meeting is and that it sticks to that agenda.
Okay, great. So speaking of those, the derailer and the dominator, how on earth do you kind of control those kind of personalities, Clive?
Yeah, in the derailer, you get them in all sorts of situations. When I'm doing presentations, quite often, you'll get somebody who will decide that they know the technology better than you and they want to go really technologically, and it's a case of, hang on, I'm trying to give the business reasons behind this. So, there's ways of disrupting them, if you want to do it. Things like that's a really interesting point. Can we just take that offline? I'll discuss it with you later. Thanks very much for that. Can we just go back to where we were? So without slapping them down, but sort of making the point as casually as you can to say to them, look, yes, okay, let's just get on with what we're meant to be doing. When you come to the noisemaker, then it is a case of, you pretty much do have to slap them down. They're going on too much, like I will be doing any moment, and you'll say to me, thank you very much, Clive. The dominator who likes to take charge, well, yes, you need a dominator because that should be the chair. They're the ones who can take charge and can then bring down everybody else. Be careful with the agreeable ones. If a meeting is full of agreeable people, you're not going to end up with anybody challenging, and so you end up with everybody coming to a decision that probably nobody agrees with. So it is a case of making sure, like with any teamwork, you have the right people at the right time. Make sure that you understand how these people work. And so as a chair, when you're putting the team together that are going to be part of this meeting, you know the sort of problems you're going to be coming up against. You'll be pre-prepared to deal with them 90% of the time.
Yeah, sure. And Judith, are you surprised by the results at all? Do you see the derailer as the #1 kind of irritator?
I think we all know the derailer, and perhaps anybody who's organised a meeting and really passionately wants to get something out of it can be quite distraught if they come across somebody like the derailer. I think the key thing is to have a strong chair, to perhaps know how to be the chair and be comfortable, have some sort of simple process. Make sure that everybody in the meeting who's going to attend the meeting understands exactly what the objectives are and what the output is. So then that makes it easier for the chair to take control and say, actually, we're not talking about that today, let's move on to this, and possibly even set timings for each objective so they can control the meeting. So I think it's more about planning, but people probably do need training on this. And certainly people who are moving into new roles need to understand how to manage a meeting and what's acceptable, but also be able to plan a meeting in the right location with the right technology. And sometimes, I've seen situations where people have perhaps booked a meeting room where it's going to have some people dialing in too, and they arrive and it hasn't actually got the right technology in there to enable that meeting. So lots of, I think planning is key, but probably some training before the planning, and objectives and information being circulated in advance of the meeting. So people are very, very clear in terms of how long it's going to last, what's going to be talked about, and what outcomes they're looking for.
Yeah, that certainly chimes with the research where we saw, 29% of people said a lack of an agenda sort of ahead of a meeting or during a meeting was a bugbear. Again, this comes down to that chairperson doing a bit of work before the meeting so they know how they're going to proceed, perhaps.
Yeah, and being able to say, Joe, this is going to be your area, you'll need to bring along this information. Jane, I believe you've got this information, can you make sure that it's all distributed beforehand so everybody can see it? So, engaging with the people who are going to be in the meeting before the meeting takes place.
We did some research, and I think the 3 bugbears that came out of that were background noise, too much social chat, and lack of agenda. So similar things, distractions really, lack of focus.
Yeah, okay. Interesting. So I think you mentioned it before, you touched on it in terms of keeping things on time and on track. Should you have some sort of schedule layout for a meeting, or how is the best way to make sure you can keep on time?
Absolutely. I think it's got to be very, very clear. It's got to be fit for purpose. You know, this is going to be a 30-minute meeting. This is what we're going to talk about. These are the people. And maybe even request that somebody, you know, give them a specific time slot to cover things, certain topics, so people understand the way things are going, and you can sort of share the time out. But again, back to being a strong chair. But I do think that people need some training around this. And sometimes, you know, there are new challenges now. It's not always face to face. Sometimes it's conference calls. Sometimes it's a mix. And again, not having the right acoustics in a room can completely change the dynamics of that meeting, and perhaps may mean that people who are dialing in don't feel engaged, perhaps can't hear very well. Sometimes poor audio quality, echo in the conference room. Very quickly people can't hear properly and they don't feel engaged, and they start probably surfing the internet and doing other things.
Yeah.
It's where that chair really does need the help in having the training to be able to run a meeting effectively. If you have an agenda which says we're spending 10 minutes on this, 15 minutes on this, 10 minutes on that, that's fine if it works well. But if it happens that first 10 minutes one, it's a case of, well, you know, if we spend another 15 minutes on it now, we'll get to a really important decision. The chair should be able to say, okay guys, we are going to spend more time on this area because it's really important. It could also be that in that first 10 minutes, it's a case of, well, that disrupts everything that follows so much that as far as I'm concerned, that's the end of the meeting. It's either a case of we've got to a required output, deliverable from the meeting, in which case everything else is immaterial, or a case of we need to go away, dig out more information, do more work before we can get onto the rest of those subjects, and so therefore we will reconvene the meeting at a later date. So it's wasting as little time as possible to get the maximum amount of value from any meeting.
There's also one other bit of research that I think is worth touching on, which I mentioned earlier, which is about this issue of, you know, 21% of people said they feel that a physical meeting could be avoided just by using email or conferencing technologies. Do you think there needs to be almost like a cultural change where the person who's trying to set up that meeting stops and thinks, do I really need to have that physical meeting? Can I organise this better? Can this actually take place over a few well-organised phone calls and stuff like that? Do you think that's a sort of cultural shift perhaps, Judith?
Absolutely. I think we need to encourage people to collaborate and have more open and simple collaboration, and quite often you know, maybe using instant messaging when somebody could ask a question, perhaps previously would just set a meeting up. Maybe I can message a colleague or two colleagues and we can have a quick informal chat to resolve an issue rather than create a meeting. And I think things are trending more towards that, but again, it's still, sometimes people think they're not doing their job if they haven't had a meeting, if they can't say to their boss, look, I had this meeting at 10 o'clock on Tuesday. They need to sort of justify something. But I think, again, companies with travel bans are sort of pushing people more towards conferencing. But that just creates a whole new nightmare. I mean, even back in 2009, a guy called Kevin Hall wrote a book called Speed Lead. And looking at conference calls, he even then he was saying, you know, 23% of people were giving their full attention, 27% were doing other work, 13% were surfing the internet, and 8% were not properly dressed. So we start to look at a whole different raft of challenges.
Yeah. I think when we're looking at communication and collaboration as a whole set of processes, it's a massive toolbox that we now have. You know, there's people who may be using Facebook messaging, there's WhatsApp, there's, you know, all sorts of tools that different age groups are tending to focus on as we're coming through, looking at the old baby boomers like myself down to the millennials coming through. And yeah, email is great in some circumstances, but it is point to point. And so, you know, if I wanted to send something to you and say, Dan, do you agree with this? Then that's fine. But then it's a case of that impact of the decision that we've made. We need to make sure it gets out to as many other people as needs be. If I send it out to everybody here, plus a whole group of other people to say, we need to come to a decision on this, because it's asynchronous, at what point do I say, I've got all the responses that I need? Somebody may just have not found it at all. It might have gone into their spam folder, and so I'm not doing that in the right way. I need something which is far more synchronous in the way that the decision making will be made. Maybe an audio conference, maybe a video conference. It may be that a physical meeting is required. So, you know, it's making sure that out of that toolbox at any one time, you don't just say, I've got a hammer, everything looks like a nail. It's a case of, right, I've got a posi-drive screwdriver, I've got a flathead screwdriver, I've got this hammer as well. Which one's the right one at any time?
And when it comes to an optimum time, is there one for meetings? Is there a kind of, this is where it's going to be the most productive time of the day, and is there, in terms of length as well, is there, you know, an optimum time, do you think, either of you?
Yeah, I think it depends what you want to talk about, and again, it's back being sort of very clear to the agenda and what you want to get out of it. You know, so you might send. We're talking about sending emails instead of meetings. It's finding something absolutely that is fit for purpose. And you know, sometimes an email is the wrong tone, and maybe people read different things into it, whereas a conversation might soften that or might be easier. So I think it depends what you want to communicate. I think it's key to understand how you're communicating, and that communication, if it is a meeting, is engaging. And certainly, I'm not sure sometimes people have been trained or look at how to communicate even. Certainly in sort of face-to-face meetings, about 7% of what you say is a message, 55% is body language, and 38% is tone of voice. Do we train people? Are they aware of this? And then suddenly you move that to a conference call, 13% of what happened is message, 87% is tone of voice. Do we train people on speech impact? Do we help them to sound more impactful on a conference call?
Yeah. Okay. Before we head over back to Dan for some more research, I've got one more question from the audience actually, which asks, you know, what is a normal kind of length of a meeting in your guys' opinion, and how many meetings do you guys have in a week? So maybe we can start with the second one. How many meetings do you both have on a regular week?
10, 15 maybe?
It's define a meeting. You know, a lot of my job is that I have to sit down with different technology vendors and discuss with them what their approach to the market is, what they're doing, futures for them. It's a meeting, yeah, and I do several hundred of those a year, so you know, 20 or 30 a week, possibly at times. So you know, it's very difficult to just say yes. You know, it's that I'm spending a lot of time in meetings, but I have to do because that is part of my job, and it's not as if the outcomes from those are going to be all the same. Each meeting is different because I'm meeting with a completely different company. For a length of a meeting, again, it's horses for courses, but if you're going to be having a relatively general meeting, once you get beyond about 40 minutes, people are really going to start turning off. So you know, I would always aim for a meeting to be between half an hour and 40 minutes, if you can possibly do it in that period of time. There are cases where you will need a longer period of time, but it might be worthwhile splitting it into, you know, two parts of a meeting with a little bit of a refreshment break in the middle, so that people can go away, they can do all of their emails that otherwise they're doing under the table on their phone, they can go and have a drink, they can go to the loo and all the rest of it, just come back refreshed, brain working again.
Yeah.
Again, I think it depends on the type of meeting. You know, a conference call, I really don't think it should be longer than an hour. I think you're really struggling to keep people engaged outside of that. But you know, if you're having a very good, engaging face-to-face meeting, and maybe you're demonstrating something or you're talking about some real issues, then and you can have a coffee break in the middle, then maybe that's different. From a sales perspective, we actually give meetings a definition. So we have objective-led meetings and customer care meetings. Objective-led has to have an agenda and objectives. To drive an outcome. The customer care might be you're already in the building and you pop in to see an old friend and have a coffee with them. Yeah. And I sort of measure and talk to the team about that to try and give some definition to what they do in their week. But that's from a sales perspective. Okay,
that's an interesting approach. Dan, do you want to give us some more of the research?
Absolutely. And so I think it touches on that issue of time, you know, and how much time people do actually spend in meetings. And as you can see from the slide on screen, for the vast majority, basically half of our respondents, they're spending between 1 and 5 hours a week in meetings, which is, you know, not an inconsiderable amount of time, particularly if you up that sort of 3, 4, 5 hour. That's almost, you know, the majority of a day in total of a week spent in meetings. Then we get into the real sort of power meeting people who spend, we've got 24% spending 5 to 10 hours, 20% between 10 and 20 hours, and then this real hardy bunch, the 5%ers, who spend between 20 and 30 hours a week in meetings. That's actually not far off an entire week in meetings, apparently. And then, thankfully, there's no one in the 30 hours plus bracket, because I think that would be against the Geneva Convention to spend that long in meetings. But I think it underlines, actually, how many people are spending quite a considerable amount of time in meetings. And this point about you've got to make that time worthwhile. And if you could reduce it, surely you'd actually improve the business, because you have less time in meetings, more time doing the outcome of the meeting and the rest of their job.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know if any of you had some immediate kind of thoughts on that.
It's that 1/4 who are spending anywhere from 1/4 of their week to 3/4 of their week in meetings. I understand that the research couldn't go down to a granular level to cover people like myself, who I say, those are they meetings or are they just part of my work? Same for the sales force. Their job is to have meetings. They should be spending a great period of their time talking with the outsiders, because that's how they get the business. But you're not going to say that 1/4 of the respondents were people like myself, people like the sales force. There are people there who are spending far too much time in meetings. It is highly unlikely that they're adding a real amount of value to their business. There's going to be a lot of deadwood in those people, and it's well worth looking at why they are spending so much time in meetings. Is it to keep their head below the parapet? It's worrying.
Yeah, Judith, I don't know if you had anything to say.
I think it's frightening, actually. I think it's a frightening statistic, and I think companies should really wake up to the fact that actually they either need to invest in meetings. It's a huge amount of their time that employees are spending. So what's happening in these meetings, they either need to invest in them or really understand what's happening, and if that's actually driving the business forward. That's a huge, huge cost to the company.
It seems to touch as well on what Clive said earlier, which is that some people perhaps are having meetings for the sake of meetings because they've always had a meeting. Wednesday, 10 a.m, we always get together and we talk about things like, but do you need to in that meeting? That's perhaps what some of these numbers are like. Say the 20% group there, you sort of feel like that. Surely they can't need to spend 20 hours a week in meetings.
I think it's where it comes into it that it is incumbent upon the organisation to make sure that they can measure the value out of these meetings. So, every single meeting that is held with an organisation's okay, then there has got to be some means of capturing the deliverables from that, getting them communicated to the right people within the organisation, and then they can look and say, yes, that meeting was valuable. And if they find that a lot of the meetings have no value, then they can clamp down and they can say, no, you're not going to have the Wednesday meeting. It is a waste of time. Get on and do your work. That's what you're being paid for. This is not work.
And how about you talk about limiting the amount of time you spend in meetings, but sometimes could it actually be more efficient to talk to people one-on-one rather than in big groups of people?
Certainly. Again, it's all part of that toolbox of what is communication and collaboration about. We hear horrible stories of companies that call together all of their employees to say half of you are now sacked, made redundant. In this case, I'm sorry, that is a one-to-one issue. You call people in and you talk to them, and that way they can ask questions and so on. There's other ones where having that one-on-one experience is actually wrong because everybody else needs to know what's happening. Yeah. So it's understanding what is the right way for a meeting to take place, what is the right way for information to be communicated, how many people need to be involved in collaboration at any one time.
Yeah, okay, great. Before we get back into the discussion, I thought we'd bring up the poll 1 results. So just going to push them here. So so we asked on a scale of 1 to 5 how useful are most meetings that you attend, face-to-face or via audio or video conferencing, and it looks like the vast majority say a mixed bag in terms of some are useful, some are not useful, and that's 64.3%. So it looks like there's a big kind of variance in terms of how useful they think they are. Is that a surprise to you, Judith?
No, not really. I think it's almost sitting on the fence there, but there probably are some really useful meetings, and there are ones that just waste your time and you don't feel engaged. And I'm sure we can all think of those. And we've probably even seen the YouTube video of the conference call and how awful it could be. So it's easy to see why people might not find them useful, even though they perhaps think the agenda is attractive. So I think there's two levels of things. There's actually what's the content of the meeting, who's invited, because quite often people just invite a whole raft of people without actually saying, who do I need at this meeting to drive the right outcome? You know, how long do I need to spend? And so I think we can then start to sort of narrow things down so we have appropriate meetings with the right people there that last the right length of time, that actually are engaging, and that people know how to lead the meeting, how to be engaging, impactful, and to be in the right space for the meeting, whether that's virtual or physical. And I think companies really need to take note of that.
Okay, great. Let me put out the second poll question for our audience now. And we're asking you, if you were to set up a meeting between 5 or 6 participants of different levels of seniority from different companies in the same region, would you choose face-to-face, video conferencing, audio conferencing, a collaborative tool, email group, or something else? So it'd be interesting to hear what our audience pick for that one, and we'll come back to the results a little bit later. Clive, I just wondered what you thought about people preferring face-to-face still to, you know, audio or video conferencing.
Yeah, it's always a difficult one. I spend a lot of time in the air and on trains having face-to-face meetings. I prefer them. It's a personal thing. There is this slight disconnect once you start using different types of conferencing. And again, you know, I'm old and gnarly. I've been around for so long that I do remember the horrendous experiences of early video conferencing where, you know, 59 minutes out of an hour's meeting will be spent trying to get the damn technology to work. It works now. And for a lot of people, it is their preferred means of interacting. And that's fine. And, you know, it's a case of that, again, when you look at overall unified communication and collaboration, it's trying to find a way which meets the requirements of the vast majority of people who are involved at any one time. If you're going to be signing a contract worth 10 million quid, it's probably going to be better as a face-to-face meeting. If all you want to do is to find out from somebody in Paris whether they prefer that this design that you're doing should have Comic Sans or Helvetica in light blue or grey, for God's sake, don't do it as a face-to-face meeting. It's a complete waste of time. So it is horses for courses, but you know, it is a case of that. Yes, I understand that at times, even though I would prefer a face-to-face, it doesn't fit with everybody else. It is not economically viable, and it's the wrong tool of choice for the vast majority of people who are involved, and therefore it's not down to me. I will participate in any way that they find best. You know, voice conferencing, it works, it's great, it does get the desired results.
Mm. And do you I mean, for the last couple of years, it feels like video conferences is kind of come and gone, and audio is kind of back in terms of, you know, people want to speak over the phone as opposed to see someone over Skype or whatever tool they're using. Would you agree with that?
Definitely. I think probably bandwidth hasn't always helped with that. I think initially people were quite excited about video, but then perhaps when they got used to doing conference calls, maybe suddenly realised that video was less important. And certainly if you're doing something from your PC desktop and you're wanting to share information, actually video almost gets in the way because you can't really see people very clearly anyway, and it's not that important. I think video, perhaps, I know some of the big law firms, like that consultancy, if they're doing interviews across the pond, things like that, they will use video, and I think it's quite important at an interview and that kind of meeting that you need to see somebody. But generally, if everybody knows everybody and they've got the clear agenda, it probably isn't really required, and it sometimes doesn't add any value, and that's probably when it rules whether it's in or out.
Mm. Can it add value, video and audio, in terms of managing all those different personality types that we mentioned beforehand, the derailer and you know, all of those guys?
Well, probably if you have video, it will stop people from actually surfing the internet and doing other things, and maybe yes, people can see the dynamics of the meeting a little bit better. But I think that would probably be it. And certainly if you've got somebody who is an absolute true to heart derailer, they're going to derail whether there's video or not. Mm. So probably mixed views on that. Do you think
it's maybe sometimes easier to manage though over the phone or on Skype than in person? Maybe people feel a bit more awkward.
It's a difficult one. With video, then you can read the body language. So you move away from this 83% that Judith was talking about, or 87%, sorry, that it becomes tone of voice. And particularly when you're looking at a derailer, you can start to see when the steam is coming out their ears and the arms are crossing and all the rest. So the chair can start to be prepared to defuse that situation, which is far more difficult when all of a sudden the derailer has gone very quiet audio-wise, and you're not prepared for when all of a sudden they come through with the nuclear bomb that they're going to drop in the middle of the meeting. So, you know, there are situations. I have to say that when you start to look at the full immersive video conferencing, you do suddenly find that you forget that it's video conferencing and it feels like a proper meeting. But, you know, at £250,000 a pop, it's not something that you're going to give to every single office in a dispersed organisation. You end up with problems like the hybrid meeting, where you have 4 or 5 people who are meeting face to face because they're all in the same office, but then you're pulling in the outliers who are either out on the road or they're in the non-centralised branch offices, and the meeting happens amongst those who are sat in the room. Those who are coming in either through video or voice are left out of the meeting, and they don't get the chance to have their input. Again, a powerful chair will make sure that they are involved. We'll say, guys, haven't heard much from you at the moment. Those who are on the line, what's your view on this? You know, Jane, I believe you've got some really good input on this. Have you got anything to say about what's gone on so far? Just making sure that, you know, they are engaged, making sure that they're getting something out of the meeting by putting something into the meeting.
Yeah, definitely. I've got a good question from the audience right now, but before we go to that, Dan, you've got some more research for us. I
do indeed, and it's interesting actually because we haven't really talked about costs of meetings much so far. We've talked about like the time and why it made them more productive. But obviously, you know, if you have face-to-face meetings, it can cost a lot. And we ask people, you know, what are the most expensive things when they arrange a meeting? And no surprise, travel comes out the top, accommodation, you know, hotels and so forth. You know, you've got to hire an event space potentially, food, entertainment, even stationery supplies. I mean, you add that all together and it's a lot of money just to get some people in a room together. And so aside from all the other things we've talked about the benefits of, you know, maybe doing over technology and thinking about how you structure that meeting, you've also got to think about perhaps costs as well and how you can limit or reduce those as much as possible, I think.
Okay, great. So, you know, why do we still fly to kind of half the way across the world just to meet someone and speak to them when you can just do it over the phone or through video?
It's one of life's unanswerable questions, I think. I mean, a lot of the travel which I do is to go to events where it would be very difficult to participate in the event, either over video or just by voice. But yes, you know, I see others. It's a case of particularly as you get higher up in an organisation, this propensity for them to believe that the face-to-face meeting is the only way to do things becomes much more important in their own mindset. There's also the thing around, well, yes, if the meeting's going to be in Florida, there's some damn fine golf courses around there, or yeah, whatever it might be. So they're offsetting the personal cost to them of losing time and so on by tying something personal into it as a deliverable to them. It's not going to change rapidly. But there is a case of that, you know, organisations, stakeholders within organisations, shareholders can start to put pressure on that hierarchy to say, just why did you go all that way for 2 days to come back with little value to the business? And force them to get into this means of, yes, actually, I shouldn't have travelled there. I could have done it over email. I could have done it over voice. I could have done it over a web conference, whatever it might be. So getting them to look at the different tools that are available and choose the right one.
Yeah, and in choosing the right one, I mean, it's mostly about quality of service, and maybe that's what people are worried about when they do send someone abroad or something, you know, perhaps that's one of the reasons. Would you agree with that?
I think just clearly defining it back to this sort of fit for purpose. What kind of meeting do I need to do? as you say, if it's a £10 million deal, it's probably quite rude not to do something face-to-face. Things like appraisals, I think things like that have to be face-to-face. I think that's disrespectful to your staff if you don't do an appraisal face-to-face. But there are lots of things that you just need a catch-up. You need to agree some things. You can happily, if everybody's done some pre-preparation, you can happily agree that on a conference call. And I think it's just getting people to be sensible and to agree some common standards within the organisation as what might be worthy of travel and what would be better as a conference call. And sometimes, you know, maybe you can't arrange a meeting to travel for several weeks, but actually you could have a jump on a call and make that decision much faster. So it's just finding what's going to have the most impact. I think it's very clear that in terms of employee time and expenses, that meetings should be a huge focus for companies to get that right and to make sure that they are impactful.
And how about tools like Skype? I think you touched on it just earlier there, Clive. Are there any security implications for using tools like that? Is that something that needs to be taken into account?
Decreasingly, but increasingly there's quality of service issues around Skype. You know, as Link has now become Skype for Business, we are seeing a lot more people trying to use it, but we are hearing a lot more dissatisfaction with the end result. Microsoft have not done a good job around it. You know, Skype, when it first came through, it was used by consumers. It is still, you know, a very good consumer tool when you've got relatives living in another country, to be able to see them, to be able to, you know, my sister, her grandchildren are down in Australia, so she can't go and see them very often. Being able, both sides, to see each other, see how they're growing up, and be able for Granny to give them a good smile and say how nice they are and all the rest of it, you know, it works fine. But for an organisation to suddenly start to try and bring 10 people together over Skype for Business, there does seem to be more issues around that than there should be. Link was going in the right direction. I don't know what Microsoft have done as they've brought Skype and Link together to make it as bad as it seems to be. It's quite sad to see it happen. But when you start to look at some of the other business tools that are around, when you look at a lot of the other, you know, proper business multi-person conferencing systems, then they have got priority of service, quality of service. They can work with voice, which is you know, natural quality, I think is the way to look at it. You know, it's full quality. It sounds like the person is in the room if they've got the right equipment at the other side. And as Judith said earlier on, you know, one of the things that is incumbent on the business is to make sure if people are coming in from home that they have the right equipment. If they're going to be doing voice over IP, that they're not trying to do it over a piece of wet string, that they've got a good VoIP phone, that the quality of service and priority of service is set up for them, so you know there is dedicated bandwidth for them when they are part of that call, so that they're not dropping out, so the quality is good, that they can participate fully in the meeting.
Yeah, definitely important. Great, let's have a look back at the results now for the second poll. And as you can see there on your screens, we asked if you were to set up a meeting between 5 or 6 participants of different levels of seniority and from different companies in the same region, what would you choose? And it looks like the majority of people would choose face-to-face, followed by video conferencing, surprisingly, perhaps, and then audio conferencing, and then the collaborative tools and email groups follow on from those. But yeah, I mean, I suppose the most interesting thing there is the video conferencing above audio conferencing. Judith, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I would say so, but probably is the next best alternative to face-to-face. And I think nothing beats that sort of human touch, that, you know, if you've got time to do that, then that's, I think, generally, we're sociable beings, aren't we? So I think people want to have a much more personable face-to-face meeting, and I would have thought the perception of the next step is actually video conferencing.
Yeah, if you can do it and it's of good enough quality, then certainly do it. But you know, it's understanding that the purpose of the meeting might well be to get some actual work done. So that there will be PowerPoint presentations, Excel spreadsheets, Word documents, all need to be shared in certain circumstances, being worked upon at the same time. At that point, the video conference itself of all the people becomes a distraction, and it's using up a lot of bandwidth that can be used for actually doing that work. So at that point, you possibly need a system where you can turn off the video while you're doing the work, or what I always think is the best thing to do is to make it that it turns them into just static photos that are there. So you can still see the people if you really want to, but they're not moving around, they're not suddenly going all blurry as they go into Italian versions of presenting, like I tend to do. And the work can go on. So there are issues around video conferencing. It is great when it works, got no problems with it. There are ways of doing immersive video conferencing which brings the price down. There's companies which do it on a, you go to a video conferencing studio which is very close to your office and rent the time that you want there. So you cut down on all the travel costs and all the rest of it, you get that immersive experience, and you're not also dependent on that the host and other people all have the same system, which is another problem that you can have with immersive systems, that they are highly proprietary and struggle to talk to each other.
Okay, great. I think we'll have to wrap up there, but before we do, it'd be great to get all of your final thoughts. So maybe we could go around, Judith, beginning with you.
Okay, I'd just say fit for purpose, clear objectives, don't overrun, invest in the technology, and the sort of meeting space, whether that's virtual or physical, but make sure acoustically it's right and that people have the right equipment and are clear in terms of trained how to run an effective meeting. And I think we'll start to get a lot more out of meetings if that's the way it works.
Great. And Clive?
All of that. All I would add is, yes, making sure that people are aware what is in the toolbox, what is the best tool at any one time to use. That is an education system process that the organisation needs to get into, making sure that people do use the right tool, and that once they have an output from whatever tool they've used, that is communicated to all of the stakeholders who need the information that comes out from it.
Great, thanks. Dan?
I think I'll go back to something I had at school, which is that if you have a meeting that starts at 3, like a class that starts at 3, it starts at 3. It's not that at 3 you arrive, shuffle in, set out your papers, go and get on the Wi-Fi, someone goes and makes a cup of tea. And I think, I know that well, and I think if you have a meeting that starts at 3, people should be there at 2:55, ready to go at 3. And I think if you did that 5 minutes pre-meeting would save you 15, 20 minutes the rest of the meeting, people going, catching up, what we're doing, what we're talking about. I think it's that idea of having an agenda, a strong chair, someone who sets out the agenda of that meeting clearly, and then you add all these technology capabilities in, and you can actually cut down the amount of time people are spending in meetings and be more productive from it. That's, I think, something that could a very easy way of improving meetings at the moment.
Great. Thank you all. Thanks, Judith. Thanks, Clive. Thanks, Dan. We'll wrap up there, but I hope we've helped you to build a better meeting. And that's all from us. For more news, views, and analysis, please log on to www.computing.co.uk.